Exposure and editing is not too difficult with certain subjects and conditions. Shooting into the low angle light at sunset to capture the atmosphere as the landscape is lit up, well then exposure and editing are a little bit more challenging. The contrast range here is well outside what the camera can capture. No graduated filter on the lens or automatic exposure bracketing is going to close the gap fully between the highlights and the shadows. So the processing of these images is a little bit more of a challenge and a balancing act, where we move those sliders as far as we dare, to the limit we could say. In ACR we can see what we're up against. Any more exposure in those shadows and that would make the highlights even worse, and vice versa of course. But even if I took my exposure to the extreme left, we can see that we've lost detail exactly where the sun is. But it's something we're going to have to live with in these conditions. You'll notice there's even a slight streak in the centre of the screen. It was raining. I've hit the auto button here to give me a starting point, but I've then added plus 44 of clarity and plus 20 of texture for those foreground left grasses. The next stage is to open up the masks from here, and as you can see I've selected the sky. But I have a problem, because as I bring down the exposure I can't go too far at all until that highlight starts to look very unsightly. So really I can come down a little bit, but certainly probably no further than about there. Let's turn that overlay off. That's about as far as I can go with the sky selected, but I still have a weakness right at the top and the top right corner. Let me move this down to the bottom left while we're looking up there. To deal with the weakness at the top right corner and to some degree the right hand side, I have applied a gradient mask, and there you can see it. And if I select the mask, you can see I've just added just a tiny bit of exposure. I've added another gradient right at the top to do much the same, but the right hand corner I've just used a freehand brush. Now when I turn that on and highlight the brush, you can see over on the right hand side I've brought down exposure, highlights, and I've tweaked the blacks as well. So we're getting a lot closer to what we're looking for. I want to retain the lightness in the centre. It's all part of the picture. The next thing I chose to do was the middle distance, and when I turn on the little eye, and if I turn it on and off, you can see what I've done. I'll select it and you can see I've increased exposure and I've spread the whites and the blacks to increase the contrast. But having done that, I felt the bottom right corner also needed a graduated gradient or a graduated mask, and there you can see the effect of that in the bottom right corner. Now let me place this back up here, and we'll just flick back to the basic tab and take a look at where we are at the moment. By the way, I did use the healing brush as well, just to take away some of the worst of those raindrops that were caught on camera. There's still some there, but they're part of the scene. I tried always to improve the highlights in Adobe Camera Raw, but I was just making things worse. So I've opened it up into Photoshop. I've increased the image size width only by about 400 pixels to get a little bit more of a panoramic shape. And I've also made a selection around that flare in the middle to see if Content Aware Fill can help us out. So with the selection in place, a quick hand created one. Edit, Content Aware Fill. I need to look over here. Let's select the Auto button. Now that's not bad at all. I think a couple of touches around here would be all we need to make a pretty good improvement. Certainly better than it was. Let's select OK, hit Ctrl D, and I'll give that just a couple of touches with the healing brush. In actual fact, I backed away from my original content-aware fill. I made a new selection and adjusted where the repair was coming from just by taking away some of that green, and I've got a much better result. The upshot is that these conditions do add some difficulties, but they also add that difference we're so often chasing. I was switching between wide-angle lenses and telephoto lenses as the conditions changed. As we moved closer to sunset, I lost that glancing light on the land, and of course the impact of the sun lessened, and it did allow this image to be captured, but of course you have to be there to do that. Thanks for watching.